Let's talk to our next guest, Chairman of Reform UK, and that is Zia Yusuf. Thank you so much for joining us, Zia.
Thanks for having me.
I've just outlined some of the measures that we've heard from Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, about growth and delivering growth. Lots of words like action and sustainable and getting on with actual serious things, actual house building and airport runways and all of this. Are you encouraged that we actually are going to see growth in this country over the next few years?
We will see none. I think that you summed it up well. It's all buzzwords. It's all talk. And clearly this is a cabinet. There's really nobody in that Labour cabinet, certainly who's ever started a real business. Almost nobody has had a real serious job where they've had to think about systems at a bigger scale in the private sector. None of them have ever had those jobs. So they always think that government needs to be the entity that drives everything. And unfortunately, what this Labour government are doing in their actions is inhibiting growth in a pretty catastrophic way. If you actually just look at what Rachel Reeves has done since Labour have come to office, what have they done? They've raised national insurance on employers by 2%. They've talked down the economy in a really catastrophic way, constantly talking about black holes and some such. They have also increased capital gains tax. If you want to improve investment in the United Kingdom and get people investing more in businesses, don't raise capital gains tax might be a good idea. They've also made it much more risky, Julia, for small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses to hire people. With the whole, obviously, Orwellian term for the bill is workers' rights. What it's done is make small and medium-sized businesses who can't afford big legal fees. I speak to a lot of them. They are now cutting a lot of their vacancies. And this is actually the really bad thing when you have socialists in government, even if it's well-intended.
Well, but this is the interesting thing.
Even if it is, it has the opposite effect of that intention.
There's been so much talk about what Donald Trump is doing in the States. Why is the American economy doing so well, and why we should be looking to America. Again, even talking about Europe's Silicon Valley in the Oxford-Cambridge corridor with these two world-class universities and all the great brains and minds and ideas that are happening there, and pushing that. But the crucial thing is, we have a can-do attitude in America. We actually, in America, they actually sort of celebrate success and growth and competition. You have a very, very free, unregulated labour market, which means the hiring and firing, unfortunately, actually means there can often be more jobs as a result. But also, crucially, they've got very low energy costs compared to us, which makes it easier to sort of, set up these companies and to actually fund them. On all of those counts, that makes America a much more amenable country to growth. On the specific issue of the third runway at Heathrow, the Prime Minister, currently taking questions at PMQs from Kemi Badenoch, he only a few years ago voted proudly against Heathrow expansion. We know the London Mayor Sadiq Khan is still opposed to Heathrow expansion. He says it's because of noise, air pollution. He's obsessed with air pollution, but also he says the hugely damaging impact on our environment. Do you actually think that the Heathrow third runway will ever actually be built, given that they've been talking about it since before I was born?
No, I personally don't, and it's going to be one of those things that drags on and on. But you said something really important there, Julia, which was the energy costs. One of the most important reasons why I have no confidence at all that we will ever get real growth in this country under a Labour government, and frankly why we had precious little / none under the Tory government, is because we have the most expensive energy costs in the world. And the reason we do that is because of these insane obsessions with net zero, this religious cult of climate alarmism, which has meant that what we are doing is unilaterally disarming on a global scale. We are obsessed with renewables. It means our baseload capacity is far too low. We then have to, ironically, having not drilled in the North Sea, not using our own gas reserves, we're importing gas.
Yeah, don't. It's genuinely painful when it's laid out like that, Zia.
But it's really important. You can't, that isn't a tinkering at the edges and an announcement here and a task force there. That is fundamental to the ideology and doctrine of what we call the Uni Party. Obviously, it was Theresa May who enshrined these laws. It was the Tories, of course, who introduced the net zero minister. We shouldn't forget that. So all Labour are doing, what Mad Ed Miliband is doing, is taking what the Tories had already started and accelerating it. So that's a really fundamental point. And, in terms of new Silicon Valley, as someone who built a technology company, look, the United States and China are now pulling away at such a rapid rate. OpenAI, who make ChatGPT, they are paying their engineers on average $900,000. Do you know what when the head of cybersecurity in the UK, that job is currently less than a six-figure job. That's where it's being advertised. So our brightest and best, we still do produce incredibly bright people in the STEM fields from our amazing universities, four of the top 10, four of the top 20 universities in the world in the STEM fields in this country. But unfortunately, they are fleeing for greener pastures. They are heading to the United States. Now, we think we can get them back, and that's what Reform are going to do.
Okay, so how would you get them back?
Well, you'd unwind almost everything we've been talking about in this conversation. Exactly what Donald Trump did. Whenever people say, oh, reform, they don't understand, it's going to be really hard. President Donald Trump came to power with a very, very clear set of policies that he promised the American people. And within 24 hours, for example, he enshrined, you were just talking about trans issues, he enshrined biological sex into law within 24 hours.
Amazing that someone had to do that.
And the Tories had 14 years and they never got that done, right? So there is a lot that you can do. Similarly, he's withdrawn from the Paris Climate Accord. He's scrapping all of the net zero madness. Obviously, the US already has much lower energy than we do. We need to massively cut the size of the bureaucratic state and probably cut the civil service by more than half by the time we get into office, given how fast it's growing and improvements in technology. That means we can cut people's taxes. We need to make it much easier for small and medium-sized businesses, A, to form, and then B, to grow. So we're going to reduce the we're going to raise the threshold, at which point things like corporation tax and IFRS, all of these things that are incredibly difficult for small and medium-sized business owners, we're going to scrap all of that stuff, get all of the red tape out of the way, and that's how you allow the British economy to grow again.
Let's talk about what's been going on in America then, because Donald Trump has just had a judge. We keep seeing this in the UK, haven't we? We saw this over trying to deal with, deporting people to Rwanda and pretty much everything else that the last Tory government was saying they were attempting to do, where we've got a judge who is basically put on hold for at least a week Donald Trump's freezing of the hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money spent on lots of federal agencies. No one was quite sure which agencies would be impacted, what the direct impact would be. Do you think that either any government for any hue, but particularly if there were a reform government next time around, could take a leaf out of Donald Trump's book on that front?
Well, absolutely. I mean, when we win the next general election,
when you say
not just well, look, if you look at where we're headed in the polls, Julia, we've got an enormous amount to do. Clearly, we have an enormous amount to do, but we can see the trend and direction in this country is that British people are waking up. They're waking up and appreciating the optimistic message that Nigel and our MPs are offering them, and that's why we've gone from 14% support in the general election just 7 months ago to polling average of the polls at 25%. So yes, we have an enormous amount to do. We don't take anything for granted, but we are confident that this great country can be the dynamic and prosperous country we know that it should be. Now, in terms of your question about how some of what Trump's executive orders, some of those are being challenged in the courts. Well, of course, every country has certain frameworks and checks and balances. I will say that the founding fathers in the United States were very particular about putting the purse strings. That's the challenge that the Doge, as amazing as Elon is, the Doge's biggest challenge, for example, is that Congress largely in the United States controls the purse strings. But the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, so long as, big condition here, so long as there are majority of Reform MPs, and this is what we are working on, 350 to 400 Reform MPs who have been elected, who are in no uncertain terms about why they've been elected, not sort of three different religions in one like the Tories constantly trying to remove the leader, complete opposite. If we have that, then we are very confident we will be able to bring to this country a transformative agenda and get that done very quickly. Well,
it'll be very interesting to see were it to happen. Can I ask you also about immigration? There's extraordinary stats we saw from the Office for National Statistics, which are probably extraordinary, that they're once again massively underestimating the level of net migration to this country in future years, as they have done with pretty much every projection they've given, suggesting that between 2022 and 2032, which is in just 7 years' time, we're going to see an extra 5 million people in this country. That's, 4 or 5 Birminghams, depending on what we think Birmingham's population is. Who knows how much higher it is in reality than the official stats from the census last time round say. But those projections from the ONS have been wrong every year, by a massive factor. Some people are saying we're looking at actually by the middle of next decade we're going to have a population of 80 million people. If Reform were in power, what would you do about that?
Well, we'd stop it. None of that, none of what you just described would happen or will happen when Nigel's the Prime Minister. So the first thing on the ONS, You're spot on about how awful they are projections. But it's not just projections. They're awful even with the historical reports. Remember, it was the ONS who revised up the net migration figure to 1 million last year. And that was a revision to the tune of about 20%. So such is the decay now in this country. We have no idea about 200,000 people coming to the country legally, literally going through those passport turnstiles. So there's a lot of work to do there. So the first thing we're going to do is freeze net migration. So no, the population growth from immigration will be zero for a number of years, not forever, but for a number of years. We have to do that. If we don't do that, the problem is only going to get exponentially worse. The second thing we need to do is stop the boat. So we're going to immediately leave the European Convention of Human Rights, replace it with the British Bill of Rights. We will ask His Majesty's Royal Navy to conduct a humanitarian mission. And I speak to senior people in the Navy who say, listen, we can stop these boats extremely quickly, ridiculously quickly. All we need is the political clarity. We need political clarity and politicians who are going to back us. They will go in, they'll ensure nobody's harmed. They will take the boats that are coming back to France. We will ensure anyone who comes here illegally are deported. I mean, even deportations. People have no idea when you ask them, for example, how many people do you think President Obama deported during his 2 terms as president?
Yeah, it was very similar numbers.
It was 3 million people. Yeah. 3 million people, 1.6 million in his first. And you can go online and you can go on YouTube and watch videos where he's actually talking in the White House about how important this was and how it was not a left or a right thing. It's just the right thing to do. If people come here illegally, it's not fair on the people who are doing it the right way, and it causes, frankly, social decay. It really is endemic.
I think most people would say the issue is actually the fact that these people got in the first place. I mean, we've got very little excuse for that on the basis that we're an island nation.
We're an island nation that spends £54 billion a year on defence and still has a formidable navy. That's why the boat's coming, 36, 37,000 last year. It's going to be similar numbers again this year. It's just about the political will. What we need is decisive political leadership. We need a British Bill of Rights that puts the rights of British people ahead of those of foreign citizens, which means that the sovereignty of our House of Commons, of our Parliament, will no longer be undermined by totally unaccountable judges abroad.
OK, great to talk to you, Zia Yusuf.